Thank you very much, Ronald, for sticking a time frame. Okay, so next we have Jaakko.
Oh, thank you very much. Luckily, I had the opportunity to ask Steve yesterday how long I have for this presentation, and he turned around and said, it's 5 minutes, and I'm a rude chair. So I had to crop the presentation a little bit, let's put it this way, but the Germans say that the spice is in the brevity, so let's try and keep it short and sweet. So I think one point that Ronald already alluded to, and I think that is a key point when we're looking at the reconciliation of trade data, is that we actually have two sources of discrepancies, two fundamental sources. One fundamental source of discrepancies is that even if countries record everything that they're doing extremely accurately according to their own rules, we might see considerable discrepancies because they have different methods, because of these questions of re-exports and so on and so forth, the stuff that Ronald talked about at length. The second source of discrepancies is what Ronald alluded to, is this question of okay, what the customs people are worried about. You know, are you actually recording what is happening? And there might be a lot of different reasons why countries or customs officers do not record what is actually being traded. And I think there's, you can say that that might be malicious, smuggling, these kind of things, but it might also be simple mistakes. And I think it is very important to recognize that if you look at trade statistics in greater detail, you actually have quite some indications for all three of these sources playing a role in creating discrepancies. Now, if we look at, if you take as starting point what we should be getting from Comtrade, international merchandise statistics, then obviously it's exporter reporting a value and a weight, and then importer that it's reporting a value and a weight. And the first question that we ask ourselves is, okay, what do we know? What should we expect about these values? And the starting point is that the weight that countries are reporting should be roughly similar, and the value that countries are reporting out should be roughly similar. Now, obviously, there's all kinds of reasons for discrepancies there, as simple as while the ship is going from one port to another, the goods might get lighter because there's an evaporation, or there's a lot of different reasons that you can think about. But at least in a ballpark, you should see some similar types of values. Now, the second relationship where we should expect some sort of coherence is the question about the value and the weight. And the value and weight ratios, they should again be in for the same good, it's traded in the same year, there should be ballpark somewhere similar. Now, again, there's a long list of reasons why that is not the case. I give you one example: global gas trade. Gas in the Asian gas markets costs simply 3 times as much as in the North American gas market. Now, that is something that will skew your value weight ratios, but there should be, in global markets, there should be some discipline on the size of these discrepancies, right? So we said, okay, let's be generous here. Let's say, okay, we believe a value-weight ratio, if it's up to 5 times off the median value-weight ratio for all countries trade in a given year for a given 6-digit HS code. And so for the discrepancies between the value, we said, okay, well, country A exports might be up to double what country B reports as the import, or down to half of it, and the same for the weight. So when we asked that question, and we did that for 2.2 million 6-digit trade flows in Comtrade for 2011 and 2012, what you see is, first, we only have complete records for 37.3% of those trade flows. So cases where both the importer and the exporter are reporting the same trade stream, and they're both reporting both a value and a weight. And if you then look at, okay, for those 37%, are they actually consistent? To what extent are they consistent to each other? You see that actually for only less than half, you see these values matching up, even if you take these very generous bounds of being 5 times off. The good news is that these 17.5% that you're left with actually contain over 85% of the value and volume of global trade that is recorded in those 2.2 million flows. So the bigger the flows get, the more accurate they tend to be. The smaller the flows get, the less accurate they tend to be. Now, there has been obviously attempts to reconcile these before, and I think one of the most sophisticated efforts to do this is the Barkey database. And we started working with Barkey data, trying to, when we were building our database, and actually the first iteration was entirely built on Barkey. This is for about 11 million trade flows, and I'm showing you the distance of the weight value ratio from the median weight value ratio, again for the same HS code in the 6-digit HS code in the same year. So you see that on here that for about 7.7 million of these data points, it looks quite well. They are within double or half of what they're reporting against each other. So it's up to 100% difference, but not more than that. And I think that is something that we can think as being quite credible in the context of trade statistics. Then there's about 2.8 million data points where it's up to 5 times. And then there's a whole number of data points where we see, so about 1 million of them, where the discrepancies get so large that you have to have serious questions about the accuracy of the reporting. So 100 times, 1,000 times, more than 1,000 times off the weight value ratio. And if you actually then start looking at what has happened with these individual trades, because you can go then back and say, okay, why is this 1 million times off? What you see is quite simple. It might be quite simple mistakes as reporting in the wrong category, or it might be something as simple as a decimal point that has switched. But so we have to find a way to move away from those, to strip those out of the trade statistics, so that you can then start reconciling the more reliable stuff. So those about 10 million data points that are reliable. Now, so what I just wanted to say about Barkey is that it relies on quite strong assumptions about which country is reliable and which country is not reliable. And that's not politically palatable, but it's also empirically something. It actually doesn't necessarily improve the quality of the trade data. And so what we then did in the next stage, and this is my last slide, and I'm going to keep it very brief, is to develop a new methodology where we went back to the old Comtrade data and started looking at these relationships, and then started deciding on something like as simple as here, the reporter 2 also reports a value but doesn't report a weight. The value and the weight from the first reporter match, but they don't match with the value of the second reporter. Well, then it's quite a simple decision to keep what the exporter is reporting. And in the same way, we make these kind of decisions for all these different cases. And so what you then get, from the 17.5% that I mentioned here, which contains the 85% of the value, you can then move to about almost 60% of the data points that then contain 97% of the global value that is traded. And then what you then do in a last step, or what we then did in a last step, is to then say, okay, those flows that we exclude, that the ones that there might be some individual flows in there that actually have a lot of value and volume, and that we want to keep inside the trade data, even though they seem to be far off. And that's where we then went manually adjusting those trade flows, and you can do that only for a limited number. But you then are able to bring back a considerable amount of the weight and value that you are about to exclude, and end up with something that is quite, we think, quite workable. So yeah, that's the very, very short version of this. I'm happy to discuss with others in greater detail how exactly we did this, but this is just a kind of an indication of the direction that we're going into.
Is there a methodological document on your Chatham House website that describes this?
For the first version of the database, which was relying on trying to fix Baki data, and that document is indeed publicly available. The second version, which is about trying to reconcile Comtrade data without going back to Baki, that is something that we're still in the process of writing up and discussing with various experts.
Well, we shouldn't continue this, but you may want to put that on the website for NAGI, the more complete presentation.
Yes.
Okay. Our second presenter is, oh, I'm sorry, it's too far away. Thank you. Our second presenter is Lynn Jones, who's an international economist at the U.S. International Trade Commission. Lynn?
Good morning. I'm Lin Jones from the U.S. International Trade Commission. It's an honor to be here. And thank you for UNSD and INIHA for organizing the event. This presentation is no mean to represent any way the views of the U.S. International Trade Commission or any of its individual commissioners. It's purely out of our research interest. In constructing the global supply and the use table, the trade statistics have to be harmonized. A common method is to using proportional adjustment such as RAS. So this short presentation, it will use two examples to illustrate the problems of proportional adjustment and offer alternative method, which is weighted adjustment by reporter reliability index. So this is the first example to illustrate the problem with the proportional adjustment with the U.S. national account. The table shows the components of the 2002 U.S. gross domestic income with their correspondent components, the value and the value share. Since all the incomes come from the production, GDI should be exactly equal to the GDP, but because they are calculated in different ways, in practice there's always a statistical discrepancy there. And the common practice is just using the proportional adjustment to distribute the discrepancies across all the components based on their value share. So here we see the Here we see the compensation of employee received the largest adjustment because it accounts for 57.5% of the GDI, and the farm proprietor's income received the smallest adjustment because it accounts for less than 0.1% of the GDI. But when we look at the quality of the data, this compensation of the employee actually, in fact, is much high quality data because it's based on the W-2 form, which is the U.S. Wage and the tax statement provided by employee. It's highly reliable. But on the other hand, the farmer's income is based on self-reported farm income, so the quality of the data is much weaker. But you see the problem is now with the proportional adjustment, we over-adjust more reliable data, make the reliable data less reliable without really making the less reliable data more reliable. So second example, we're using this international trade statistic to illustrate the problems of proportional adjustment. Here, we take into account the re-export through Hong Kong, and we look at the China-Hong Kong export to a number of the trading partners. Here we see the discrepancy with Malta and Russia is significantly high, about 200 and 110%. but the trade discrepancy with Korea and Japan is much smaller, reflecting the high trade statistical quality for these trading patterns. But however, if we apply the discrepancy proportionally across all those trading patterns, so the trade with Korea and Japan will receive much larger adjustment because they have much larger trade value. This is just another example of that proportional adjustment could work in the wrong direction. So what will be the alternative? Here we suggest using a weighted adjustment with reported reliability. In other words, is a way we'll distribute and adjust the discrepancy based on the assessment of the quality of reported trade statistic. But in order to do so, we need to have an indicator to measure reported reliability and to reflect how consistent a country reported its trade statistic with all the trading pattern instead of just one or two bilateral trade statistic. So I'm not going to go into the detail about what kind of issues needed to be addressed, but the important is of this indicator should be able to capture the strengths and the weakness of a country's ability to consistently report its trade for each end-use category and for different commodities. So is there such indicator existed out there? Jahar actually, in fact, developed the RRI, the Reported Reliability Index, in his 1996 paper, which later was also adapted and used by some of this later work. The calculation of the RRI is pretty straightforward. It just uses the share of accurate reported trade in a reporter's total trade for a particular end-use category in a sector using a threshold level, such as maybe less than 20% discrepancy in mirrored data. It has the value from 0 to 1. The higher the value goes, the more reliable the country is in relative term in reporting its trade statistic. The benefit of using II will encourage the reconciliation model to adjust those data less reliable, more so than those data more reliable. So in the next couple of slides, I will be very quick to show the example of some of the results. Here, show that China as an exporter, it is comparatively more reliable in reporting trade statistics for some of the commodities, such as the food, beverage, chemicals, basic metals, but comparatively less reliable in reporting trade statistics for wearing apparel, rubber, plastic products, and so on and so forth. This slide shows as an importer, United States is comparatively more reliable in reporting trade statistics for auto and parts, water products, machinery, equipment, but comparatively less reliable in reporting trade statistics for textile, wearing apparel, and so on and so forth. So within a country, there's quite a variety in reporting different trade statistics for different commodities. So here is a very quick example of the 41 wide countries, how they differ in the reliability in reporting trade statistics for basic metal, both as the importer and the exporters. So I'm going to very quickly speak through. This is very similar, just using the G-type countries for the wearing apparel. So the conclusion is, these examples to show how country will exhibit a great deal of the variations in reporting trade statistics, not just among themselves, even within themselves for different commodities. So by taking into those quality variations into the reconciliation process, we can ensure the resulting statistics with a better, more reliable quality. Thank you.
Thank you, Lin. Very nice example of why we've got to take into account the quality of the data. Okay, so let's stop now and have some questions from the floor. Please, as I said, keep your interventions short. I might actually ask either the United States or Canada who have some experience with this bilateral reconciliation, perhaps say a few words. And I know the U.S. has been working on weighting techniques for their input-output tables and balancing, which try and take into data accuracy. They might provide a brief comment as well. So what do we have in terms of questions or interventions?